All right, so welcome everybody. Hello, I'm Julia Jessen. I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. Thank you for joining me today for this Grant Wood in Focus presentation. This is a series of Zoom presentations that we do at the CRMA that look at varying aspects of Grant Wood's life and career. And today I'll be discussing some of Grant Wood's artworks that functioned as advertisements. Over the course of this series, we've discussed multiple different groupings of artworks that Grant Wood created on commission. And I'm showing you a couple of recently featured examples of that kind of work. And his advertising work is another of these groupings. And so it kind of adds to that story of the importance of commissions throughout his career. The majority of the works I'll be discussing today come from fairly early in Wood's career, around this moment where he's starting to make that transition into working as an artist full time. In the 1920s, he's really becoming well known in the community as this kind of go-to artist and craftsman for all kinds of different projects and commissions. We'll start, though, with some work that he did for the Henry S. Ely and Co. Realtors, and to kind of set up what he was doing with them shortly before this, just to lead you into kind of what was going on in Wood's life. So this would be early 1920s that he starts working with them. In 1917, the United States had declared war on Germany and entered World War I. Wood was deferred from military service because he was the sole provider for his mother and sister. But later on that same year, he would actually waive that exemption and would be sent for basic training and then went on to work in the camouflage division in Washington, D.C. He's discharged in 1919. And then in 1920, he has his first trip to Paris then and experienced that. So once he's back, he takes this job with the Henry S. Ely Company of Realtors, and they were developing this Vernon Heights neighborhood. The work that he did for them was designing promotional brochures and advertisements, as well as creating actual little kind of dollhouse-sized models of the homes that they were making. So he was actually molding newspapers and sponges into the shapes of shrubbery and trees to resemble landscaping outside of these little dollhouse homes. And then he also did these tram posters or trolley cards, which is what I'm showing you here. These were purportedly designed by Wood in collaboration with Ely, and they were supposed to be for the promotion of this Vernon Heights neighborhood. Each has kind of a similar design to it, but includes a different poem, emphasizing the kind of residence one would be able to find in this peaceful suburb. And it was meant to draw people to the area. The illustrations that accompanied the poems were pretty simple, but also very orderly and kind of showing this sort of well-manicured design, emphasizing the impression that this is a place that you want to be, this is a place that you want to live. And his work with the Ely Company didn't stop there. So in 1921 to 22, he created this piece, Adoration of the Home, for the Henry S. Ely and Company. And this was one of his first kind of larger commercial commissions. Ely wanted this large outdoor mural painting. It was supposed to be this eye-catching billboard that would be under a sidewalk overhang near this model home that Ely constructed in downtown Cedar Rapids. It was something that Ely was asking for that would sort of glorify this idea of the American home and put the idea of acquiring a home into the mind of the viewer, hopefully sold through Ely's office, and kind of position it within this sort of grand sweep of history, really kind of aggrandizing this whole scene here and the acquisition of a home. He was really putting it within the scope of this very broad sort of sense of culture and within this very kind of civic pride sort of image. It was meant to inspire pride in people as they were looking at it for their heritage and their future as well. This is one of Wood's first works that could be considered public art as well. So to give you a little more information about Ely, I'm showing you a little cartoon, a caricature here from a newspaper. He was a local home developer and a realtor and did perform this function as being kind of an early supporter of Grant Wood. And what you're seeing here is kind of illustrating different aspects of his life, his hobbies, things like that. But you also see in his hand there that he's holding that model home that was created in downtown Cedar Rapids. And then there's a detail, and there's adoration of the home, the Grant Wood painting, with a youth admiring it and kind of looking on there. So the Ely model home that you're seeing here was located at the corner of 3rd Avenue and 3rd Street. And an article from a 1921 Cedar Rapids Evening Gazette discusses the scarcity of housing, building prices, construction material, scarcity of lumber, and the availability of funding, and really kind of praises Ely for this idea and this desire to let people know that even people without a ton of money would still be able to build and furnish a simple home that is still kind of a fine quality example of a home. So this was looked at as being very innovative. It was a small home in downtown Cedar Rapids, and again with this idea of promoting the building of your own home. Um, it was very popular. So there was 10,000 people that toured it during the first 3 weeks that it was open. And later on, Ely would convert it into his office, with adoration of the home still on display outside as well. The painting, again, was outside, but under some sort of a protective cover, and it functioned as an advertisement for what Ely was trying to do here. In another article from the time, they describe the experience of visiting the home. And I want to read that for you because I think it gives a nice sense of what that experience was like. And it's described with a lot of detail here. So bear with me, I'm going to read this for you. The article said, quote, "To enter the little house, you turn off the broad, prosaic cement sidewalk of the city street and up a quaint, narrow brick pathway. With a thump of the knocker, you are admitted to that quiet, securable only by the 4 home-like walls, while the flurry of business continues in the trading district outside. Much too small a place for our family, you may have thought as you viewed the low lines of the exterior. But the little house takes whimsical pleasure in showing you that a vast amount of comfort and hominess can be spread over 18 by 30 feet of floor space and tucked into a story and a half of elevation. For Mr. Ely wants to sell even another idea, that of owning the right kind of home, one planned to fit the needs of the particular family, one not necessarily large, but arranged to secure an appearance of spaciousness." End quote. So I hope that gives you a sense that not only is this, functioning as an advertisement for what Ely was doing, but also it was this kind of big experience. It was so popular because it was kind of this novel idea of coming and touring this home, getting a sense of what it could be, seeing this advertisement as well. It was an entire experience that people could engage in. The painting originally had text panels on either side. It was kind of like a triptych with 2 text panels on either side, showing you an idea of what that would have looked like. Those panels are no longer existing. And it's unclear to what extent Wood was responsible for the text in the inscription, but that text gives us an idea of how we're supposed to read and understand what's going on in the painting. So that was also there with the painting, letting people know how they're supposed to read it and how they're supposed to understand and engage with it. So that text, showing you a little closer up here, but I'm going to read that for you and let you look at the painting so you can see kind of what's going on. So the text read, quote, "Cedar Rapids, out of the golden mists of futurity, new civic buildings rise. In more solid silhouette stand structures dedicated to business. The crag-like contour of a factory forms a background for a group representing various industries and trades. Back of them hovers the spirit of commerce, symbolizing in a single figure the many activities upon which the commercial life of a community depends. On the left are the figures of agriculture and animal husbandry with their attributes. In the center sits Cedar Rapids enthroned. Education is a child at her knee. Religion upholds her right hand, and in it proudly poised, the focus of adoring eyes, behold the home." And so that kind of gave you an idea of how you were supposed to understand this sort of grand scope, this grand sweep of what's going on in the image. And Wood was certainly being very imaginative and creative in the creation of this piece, But he's also looking to other sources as well, and they may have inspired some of how he ends up creating Adoration of the Home. So one of these possible sources is the Louis Sullivan designed People's Savings Bank in downtown Cedar Rapids. There are mural paintings up above in the savings bank, and these were created by Alan E. Philbrick. This was from around 1911, and there's a very kind of similar style that's going on here. So with Philbrick's work, this very decorative horizontal arrangement, classically idealized figures, prominent aspects of nature like oak trees and corn and wheat. And these are things that seem to relate to what Wood does later on in Adoration of the Home. So maybe looking back to this earlier public work as some source of inspiration for what he did there. The composition here and the style in which it's being portrayed also seems like it could be inspired somewhat by Renaissance art as well. Looking at things like an adoration of the Virgin or a Madonna and Child, in which we have a central enthroned figure surrounded by saints coming to kind of pay attention, pay homage to those central figures. And so there's also this broader connection to this long history and scope of art history, and it places the painting within this larger construct. And again, links back to that idea that Ely was going for of this very aggrandized vision of Cedar Rapids as this city of homes placed within this really broad cultural context. The composition and the figures, again, are meant to glorify the city's resources and virtues and encourage the Cedar Rapidians who encountered it to think about the city as one that is both modern and growing. Our central female figure represents the home, surrounded by other allegorical figures that we heard about in that text. And the piece is divided between agriculture and industry. And that implies that this idea of kind of a suburban home is one that is possible through both of these things. And the city rewards both is how we're supposed to kind of meant to see that. One second here. There we go. Okay. Just adjusting my settings real quick. There we go. Okay. So kind of looking in a little more detail at the painting and what's going on here. On the left, we have our farmer and farm animals. Um, this idea of animal husbandry and agriculture, again, set against that kind of prairie background behind them. Oops. Next to them, we've got this goddess of agriculture pictured with grain or corn and wheat with her. And opposite her, holding a bag of grain or flour, is the worker who processes these agricultural products, backed up with behind him by these other figures that are part of the building professions. We have this figure surrounded by these kind of religious imagery, a Bible, a cross that's being present there, holding up the right hand of that central figure as she holds the home. And our central figure of Cedar Rapids with her wreath of laurel leaves in her hair, perhaps somewhat similar to what we would see later with our Veterans Memorial window and that figure of victory in the center with the laurel wreath as well. And she's holding one of Ely's homes aloft as if it were this kind of guiding light of wisdom and truth, something that everyone else in the painting is looking to. If you kind of follow the gazes of everyone there, everyone is focused in on that home that's being raised aloft. And at her lap there, our little young boy is the figure of education. He's got a book as well. And then on the right, we have engineers, representatives of various building trades, carpentry, etc., builders, factory workers, tradesmen, and agricultural middlemen as well. And they're standing poised for action against the jagged skyline of the city. With them is our god of commerce figure holding the symbol of commerce and negotiation, as well as a money bag, giving us a little reminder of business and progress, and kind of what makes that possible, this sort of financial aspect that's going on as well. And like I mentioned, all the figures are focused in on the home, and only the cow here looks out at us as the viewer. Much like many of his other paintings, Wood used local friends and acquaintances to model for him. And so one of these models that he used was Paul Hansen, who's featured as one of the two farmers wearing blue bib overalls, I believe as the civil engineer figure there. And then S.W. Neville is pictured as the carpenter, William Funk, the man with the shovel and the wheelbarrow, George Holmes as the miller. He lived across the street from Grant Wood. C.L. Charles as the foundry man. Nan Wood, the artist's sister, is the figure of agriculture. And the other farmer pictured is Ralph Conybeare, who is a good friend of Paul Hansen. Don Hansen was the small boy, our figure of education. And Stella Conybeare, Ralph's wife, is sitting and holding the small home, our central figure of Cedar Rapids. She was Grant Wood's cousin. One figure I actually do have a photo of, the model, Vida Hansen, who was Paul Hansen's wife. She's considered to be the woman surrounded by the religious symbols here. And this was a photo taken by her husband around the same time as the painting was created. Francis Neville appears as the winged spirit of commerce. And altogether, once the painting was completed, they celebrated the completion of the work with an unveiling of the painting at Wood's home, at his Kenwood Park home in the backyard. And so they invited the models, friends, and family, and all told there were about 30 or so guests there. Japanese lanterns hung from the trees, rugs were spread out on the lawn. The painting was placed on the side of the home and kind of unveiled that way. Two of the models were playing guitar and violin. And so there was this really lovely kind of party-like atmosphere going on for the unveiling of this piece. And refreshments were served. And so that's how it was sort of unveiled to those who were very close to it. Um, the piece also had a great response. I've given some indication of that, but there was a lot of press coverage of both the piece and the home, and it was received very positively. This idea was considered very innovative and effective to incorporate this idea of a work of art as an advertisement and this style of kind of creating a whole experience to view the home that was seen as being very innovative. According to one article in the Cedar Rapids Republican from 1923, I thought it was really interesting the way they talk about and refer to Henry S. Ely here, because they look at him and refer to him also as a kind of artist in his own right within the sort of world of business that he's in. And I thought this was really interesting, this combination of business and artistry, which is something that we see throughout a lot of the works that I'll talk about today. And so they said in 1923, quote, "Whatever Henry S. Ely does must be done as an artist would do it. To do it well is not enough. Many persons can do things well. Only the few can do them with the instinct and the sure hand of an artist. Ely is one of the few. Not necessarily his is the hand that executes, but always his is the brain that conceives. Mr. Ely has given freely of his time in every movement that makes for bigger and a more beautiful Cedar Rapids. All of his influence has been effective in the exaltation of all that is true and beautiful in the life of this city." End quote. So pretty effusive, but I think that's really interesting, this connection that they're making and how they're viewing this businessman in connection with this sort of artistry of business. They also had very favorable things to say about Grant Wood, talking about him as an unerring sense of color values, and having this creative instinct that is sort of this marvel of all who know him. Um, it created this sort of minor sensation in Cedar Rapids and did end up inspiring future commissions for other commercial work. Lots of people stopped by, again, kind of scores and scores to see how this was functioning, how the experience of viewing the home was like. But it's interesting, despite the success of the piece and how well received it was, later on, after realizing his mature style, Wood would express embarrassment over some of his earlier works like this. So in 1932, there was a fire that partially damaged the studio at 5 Turner Alley. And Nan, in her memoir, would write that Wood told her that he wished the fire had destroyed adoration of the home, which was stored there at the time. So it was something that he looked back on in an unfavorable light. However, as we're looking at it, it does seem that there's a lot of synthesis of a lot of the themes and ideas that he would return to again and again in years to come. So an interesting kind of discordance there in how he viewed it versus how it was received and how we can look at it in the broader context of his work. The success of this piece may have also caught the attention of other local businessmen, one of whom, David Turner, we're going to turn to next, actually. He was the owner of an expanding funeral home business, and this may have given him the thought of, if a real estate developer could have a sign that was admired for its artistry, have an advertisement that was admired for its artistry, then why couldn't the same be done for a funeral home and have that funeral home perceived as a kind of work of art in its own right as well? So that's where we're turning next, to Turner Mortuary. Um, so leading into this work that Wood would do with David Turner, I previously mentioned that he had spent a summer in Paris in 1920, but he really wanted to go back. So in late summer of 1923, he took a more extended visit. He actually took a year's leave of absence from his teaching position to go back abroad, spending months painting in Europe. And having that time really clarified for him his desire to be an independent artist and be able to kind of make a go of that working as an independent artist. So in the fall of 1924, following this time abroad, he's contacted by David Turner. And Turner had moved his family's mortuary business from its location in the Edward Mansfield House to the larger Sinclair House in downtown Cedar Rapids. Turner asked Wood to convert the turn of the century mansion into a modern funeral home. Later on, this would become Cedar Memorial, and now, of course, it is the History Center. There you're seeing an image of it as it appears today. But in the fall of 1924, Wood and a local builder, Bruce McKay, would work to remodel the mansion into something that was appealing and a functional setting for the mortuary. Wood selected and even made some of the furnishings for the interior, and he supervised the work of other craftsmen, but he also completed a lot of the detail work himself. He also planned the landscaping of the grounds, including the design for a hand-wrought iron gate. And these were things that Wood enjoyed working in. He had been working in. He spent time studying at the Minneapolis School of Design and Handicraft, and also studied under a prominent artist in the arts and craft movement. And he even opened up his own silversmith shop. So this idea of kind of craftsmanship and design was also something that he was really interested in. And throughout the 1920s, he would earn a lot of his living as a decorator and designed a lot of objects for homes in Cedar Rapids. So this is something that he had a real interest in. And throughout this project, David Turner would become extremely happy with the outcome. It turned out very well for him. He liked what Wood was able to do. And so then he also commissioned him to do some additional work. So to promote the opening of the business, he commissioned Grant Wood to create a series of pen and ink drawings of the interior and the exterior of the mansion. And these would end up being published in kind of a promotional booklet in December of 1924. And so there's a whole bunch of these different little kind of vignettes showing both interior and exterior scenes, these small details that made up the idea of what this mortuary was. I'm just showing you a few here, but just to give you an idea of the scope of what was included in this set of drawings, we have birdhouse, so a little exterior detail, table lamp and 2 chairs, an interior vignette, the facade from the east, the fireplace in the round room, the exterior view of Turner Mortuary from the southwest, and there's a detail of the exterior view from the southwest, focusing in a little more closely on the building. Open gate and tree, stairs and balustrade. And so these were very kind of lively renderings of the interior that gave a sense of the place and also gave a sense of the place as being kind of warm and welcoming, a sense of kind of a hominess to the space. And they also illustrated Wood's ability to sketch and envision his decorative projects for clients. The opening of the funeral home received great acclaim from the local press, and they also expressed how Grant Wood had contributed to the success of the project as well in the local press. And so, as a result of working together on these projects, Wood ended up with a friend and a supporter in David Turner. Turner was really impressed by Wood's attention to detail and his artistic abilities, but he had also observed that Wood was somewhat lacking in some of the business skills that you would perhaps want to be able to manage your financial affairs as a working artist, if that was what you were trying to do. And so Turner took an active interest in Wood's career, and for quite a while he would function as Wood's unofficial personal advisor and the promoter of his work. Part of this included that he saw that Wood needed a place where he could conduct business with clients, and a space to display his work and focus on painting. And so in 1924, he offered him the use of his carriage house as a home and studio. And he said that Grant could fix it up at his own expense, and he would pay no rent. And so this was something that Grant Wood accepted immediately, seemed like a good deal to him. And Turner would also secure various commissions for Wood. He would buy the artist's paintings. He organized changing exhibitions of them in the mortuary and published catalogs, placed ads in newspapers, promoted the sale of paintings to other morticians around the state. And he also arranged for Wood to speak at the group's annual conventions on how to decorate a funeral home. And so all of these things were incredibly beneficial for Grant Wood. And the chance to set up his own studio came at this great time for him. Because we talked about how he had traveled in Paris. He's really looking to become an independent artist at this time. And one of the things that he thought of as helping him to gain more of a reputation, to gain more acclaim, that would help him to do that would be having his own studio to give him a place to paint and prepare and work on what he was doing. And eventually, this would end up leading to the development of his mature style that wouldn't be fully realized until 1930. So Wood would promptly transform the old hayloft into an artistic haven where he could live and work. And it ended up allowing him to be able to resign from his teaching position at McKinley Junior High School and become a working full-time artist. Um, During this period, he started increasingly to look for freelance decorating and design projects, and occasionally selling his paintings as well. The years that he spent here at 5 Turner Alley from 1924 to 1935 were some of the most productive of his career. He took on residential commissions, commercial jobs, and created some of his most famous works within the space as well. And so now, now that he's a working artist, he's working on it full time. That leads us into his first major commission, which was also functioning as an advertisement, in 1925 for the J.G. Cherry Company. So this is shortly after he's become a full-time working artist, and at this point, he's really needing the income. Um, this period is still pretty early in his career. At the time, he was focusing mainly on landscapes. He wasn't doing a lot of the kind of work that he would be doing in this series, portraiture, building exteriors, things like that. So the J.G. Cherry Company was a dairy equipment business in Cedar Rapids. And this series was intended as a form of advertisement for the plant and for their new equipment. W.R. McEwen was then the advertising manager for the J.G. Cherry Company, and he's the one who's kind of responsible for commissioning Wood. And what he was asked to do was create a series of portraits highlighting factory workers on the job. Not only would it serve as an advertisement for the company, but executives also wanted to give Grant Wood the chance to earn some money, recognizing that he was kind of early in his career, short on funds. So it felt like a mutually beneficial kind of agreement to be able to engage in this series. So Wood brought his easel into the factory and studied several workers in the plant at different stages of the factory process. Although he hadn't reached his fully developed mature style in 1925, he had previously been working in a more impressionistic style. He did have to abandon some of that sketchiness for this series because the purpose of it was really to illustrate this machinery, this equipment, the skill to use it as well. And so he had to do that in a bit more detailed manner than he had been working in the past. He created this very close and careful study of the factory workers and the machinery. And throughout, you get the sense too of, again, that idea of craftsmanship and design and quality, which was something that he also appreciated and enjoyed throughout his career and focused on in his work throughout his career as well. He showed a lot of skill in these works at rendering the human figure, the human form, but it also shows the tension between concentrating on that human form and on the lines and the processes of the machinery and the craftsmanship that he also admired. A lot of times emphasis will be placed on the worker's gaze and their hands, so kind of leading back to the machinery, but using the figure to do that. There was an interesting reference in a Cedar Rapids Gazette article from 1960 that occurred on the occasion of the paintings being placed in the boardroom and executives visiting with employees who posed and their descendants. And it mentions that OK Burroughs, who was the assistant advertising manager at the time that Wood created the paintings, how he had worked with Wood as he was there working on these images, and how he had also created some photographs as well at the time. And so it's possible that Wood did work on site, but then in finishing up the pieces, referred back to some reference photographs to finish things up and finish up those details. Cherry Burrell's records indicate that the corporation paid Wood between $25 and $35 each for the pictures, and all of the frames containing the paintings were handmade, decorated, and delivered personally by the artist. Throughout, there is a theme of quality through craftsmanship that is pervading here, and that theme guided the choice of worker and task and tool. So most of the figures here are long-term employees of the factory. The skills that they're demonstrating are these high quality skills that required time in order to gain mastery of. And all of these things inspired how the portrayals were created. At this time, the series for the J.G. Cherry Dairy Equipment Factory celebrated also the creativity of labor, as well as this industry's contribution to the local economy. And that was something too that he was increasingly focusing on with the scenes and individuals that he was creating in his work. So let's talk a little bit more individually about these pieces. So the coil welder, the model for this piece was Charles Sheldon. And here what you're seeing is this coil machine, tubular tinned copper coil through which the heating and cooling medium was circulated. The coil rotated in milk and cream, and in its day, it was the fastest and most efficient heat exchange unit ever created in the dairy industry. But what's interesting here again is how Wood kind of melds together man and machine. As we're looking at the welder, the way that he's sort of arched over, the way that he's bent over seems to almost kind of mimic the shape of the coil as well, that curving shape. And he becomes almost like this extension of the machine itself. He's also somewhat anonymized. He's wearing these goggles as he's welding. And so although there is a lot of specificity there, people who worked there were able to recognize who was posing for these different figures. There's also kind of an anonymous quality to them as well. So your focus is on the machinery there. And there's kind of a melding of the two, of man and machine. Somewhat similarly here with the coppersmith, um, this piece features Louis Yandel. I had the opportunity to meet some of his family members recently, and they were kind enough to provide some additional details about his life that I'm happy to share with you now. So he was born in 1891 in Czechoslovakia and emigrated in 1906 at 15 years old. He married his wife Marie Stadola in 1915, and he was the long-time and long-skilled sheet metal man for the Cherry Company. He was employed there for 41 years and retired in 1957 and had 4 children and 6 grandchildren. This painting comes from when he was 34 years old. Here he's working on brazing and soldering the coil arms to the coil shaft. Um, and here again, we have this difficult task of kind of subordinating the man to the process. And here Wood is doing that by placing that soldering stick across his eyes, kind of falling across his face, to obscure it somewhat, again, kind of anonymizing the figure, because the face otherwise would draw away from what was going on with the machinery and with this action that he's completing here. And it's kind of similar to what we saw with the coil welder. Again, the man is kind of blending into the surroundings and becoming part of the machinery here. Also similar to the coil welder, we have the vertical stance of the coppersmith rather than being kind of arched over like the coil welder was. And this echoes the vertical beam that he's working on here. Another detail provided by OK Burrows, the assistant advertising manager at the time that these were created. He said, quote, "In working with Mr. Wood on this particular painting, he explained to me why the hand and glove in the immediate foreground were treated in the particular way that was the case. He indicated that fingers for close range viewing were difficult to paint, hence the glove technique. In the original painting, the glove is the faded out blue glove, which has been carefully washed, repaired, and reworn by a thrifty Czech workman. This treatment of clothing is also noticed in the coloring of the overalls," end quote. So although the figures are somewhat anonymized so that we focus in on the machinery, there are these little details that give us a sense of the overall type of worker who's working on these different things. This very kind of skilled labor, this kind of responsibility that's being communicated by some of these little details that are included in the painting. Moving on to the painter, this is Joe Horsky. His son also became an employee at the company in 1957. And here they're showing the adaptation of spray painting to manufacturing operations in the Cedar Rapids division. And here, the figure, we're kind of moved back a bit. We're not as kind of close in on the action that's taking place. And the figure is also somewhat turned away from us. We're seeing them just a bit in profile. And so the machinery is really taking center stage here, is really kind of the focus of this image. And here's a detail of our figure. The shop inspector was Jerry or Jack Nadel. He started in 1919 and was still working for the company in 1960. And here what's being depicted is this extreme accuracy that's required in the manufacture of close-fitting moving parts at Cherries. We see the workman with a micrometer checking a part. And the focus is on these very skilled hands as they handle the part and checking what's going on with it. That's accentuated with backlighting to demonstrate, again, the focus in on these hands and the extreme accuracy that's required. And everything is kind of drawing our attention down to those hands rather than to the part that's being included. Multiple lines kind of converge down and bring our focus in. We've got that angled window pane, which kind of angles out to the edge of the fingers there. The inspector's gaze is down at his hands, and the horizontal line created by his arm also moves us to look at what he's doing with his strong hands there. 10 tons of accuracy features Claire W. Weber as the model. And here he's working with this milling machine, which was used for the production of large freezer bases. This, again, is one where we're farther back. We're seeing more of the surrounding scene. It's possibly the most detailed of the paintings, and also perhaps one of the more commercial of the paintings, really focused in on the machinery. That's really what's taking our attention here. There's the most detail being communicated here, even though the figure that's included is regarded as an expert in working with this type of machinery. Our turret lathe operator is Joe Polson. Again, another man who worked at the company for about 40 years. He trained many new men for various machine operations as well, kind of passing on that knowledge. And here too, we have that interest that Wood has in these curves and angles and lines that can be found in the dairy equipment, and that we saw throughout the other paintings, including the coil welder and the coppersmith. So that's being communicated here too as well with the turret lathe operator. The cover maker is a little bit different, more focus on the individual figure. And pardon me for the black and white image here, but the figure that's featured here is J.W. Barnett. And we've kind of abandoned that subordination of man to machine here. The figure really is the center of interest. His face in particular, but also these strong hands as well, and kind of what he's doing with them. There is a lot of kind of focus on the face and the intense study, kind of psychological study of the human face that's being communicated there. So a little bit different than some of the other pieces in this series. Wood also created an exterior view of the J.G. Cherry plant, and the Gazette remarked in 1925, quote, "To the painting of the factory exterior, Mr. Wood has lent the effect of sincerity by much detail, including even the telephone poles and the junkyard, avoiding the tendency to doll up with flowers and bordered lawns, sometimes seen in the purely commercial artwork," end quote. So this was seen as something that was a little more true to life, true to what was expected, rather than a very sanitized version that one might expect in an advertisement. Some details here. The buildings on the right were built in 1919 for the Cherry Burrell Company, and the two other buildings on the left were located across the 4th Street Railroad tracks and were built earlier in circa 1910. Across the middle of the painting is a pedestrian walkway that was built across the tracks to connect the complex of buildings together. One interesting point about this piece is its shape and this kind of curved shape that we have here. This was something that he did on another series of paintings, but those were intended to hang over the doorways at the McKinley High School library and were intended to echo the shape of that doorway arch below. It's still somewhat unknown why Wood included this arch in this particular painting, but one hypothesis is that perhaps he had a specific place in mind to hang the piece, or maybe he wanted to give viewers the sense that the piece was meant to hang above a doorway and kind of function in this very grand way, somewhat like a mural. So those are a couple of potential options, but we're not entirely sure. The paintings were first displayed in a window at the Indianapolis Power and Light Company as part of a dairy equipment show that was held there. And they were intended to energize the presentation, to do something a little different, show the machinery, give the sense of the machinery in a different way than what was typical. They also went on to be displayed at conventions in Cedar Rapids and Detroit, and they received a lot of recognition and praise all of these different times that they were being displayed. They were also used in promotional brochures as well and recreated in that way. In 1928, the paintings were hung in the office boardroom, so they could be admired there. And again, kind of thinking about how they were received and the reception of these pieces, the Gazette again talked about the paintings in November of 1925, saying, quote, "that there is an art in industry and beauty in machinery has been proven by a local artist and a local industrial concern together. Both the idea and the manner in which it has been developed are so unusual as to be innovations. For heads of a commercial enterprise to call in an artist is comparatively infrequent in circumstance, and pictures glorifying purely mechanical processes and infusing them with the spirit of artistic creation are rare. Both of these things have been done here," end quote. And so again, there's this recognition and this emphasis on the idea of business and industry in combination with artistry. I think that's something that we kind of keep coming back to and keep hearing about throughout these advertising commissions that Wood was taking on. The Cherry Company occupied these buildings until the 1950s when Collins Radio moved in and the Cherry Company moved to 6th Street Southwest. One set of the buildings was later converted condemned and destroyed, but the building located between 10th and 11th Avenue Southeast still exists, now owned by the Chatham family, and remains home to local businesses and artist studios. The Cherry Company Commission demonstrates Wood's close relationship with businesses in the Cedar Rapids area and how important that was and how it helped to contribute to his success. Many of these local proprietors would continue to be patrons of Wood's art throughout his career, like David Turner, as we previously mentioned, but also others as well. John Reed, who was the founder and president of National Oats, would also become a friend who would commission work from Wood too. And it was the support of these local businessmen that was really crucial to the blossoming of Wood's career and to making it possible for him to do the things that he would gain later recognition for as well. This particular series, the J.G. Cherry series, is one of the only industrial kinds of scenes that Wood would create, but they really show his own sensitivity to this kind of social environment and this interest in art and industry that recurs in his work. Before we finish up, I do have one more piece that I wanted to talk about, which is very different than what we've looked at so far, but it gives a sense of something that he was doing later on, that was functioning as an advertisement and how he's sort of applying his art to a promotional poster like this later on. So this is for Bundles for Britain, from 1940. And Wood, at the time, he was a staunch supporter of Franklin Roosevelt, and he endorsed the president's pro-British policy at the time. So as World War II is approaching, he briefly interrupts what he was doing, what he was focusing on in his art with these very kind of isolated American themes. And instead, he does a few minor political drawings in reaction to what was happening in Europe, to the Nazi invasions that were occurring in Europe. And he ends up developing just one of those drawings into a finished piece for public viewing, which is what you're seeing here. And this was done to aid the Bundles for Britain campaign, which was a US relief organization that sent clothing and medical supplies to England. So here in this image, it depicts this kind of melodramatic war scene in this poster, emblazoned with the legend Blitzkrieg, and features a young mother sheltering her little boy while the RAF counterattacks German bombers. So very different from what we've seen so far, but some of the aims are kind of similar. It's also meant to engross us as a viewer. It's meant to draw us in. This time it's relying on kind of an emotional, empathetic response, rather than something like Adoration of the Home, where they're drawing on civic pride, and kind of inspiring you to look to the future in that way. But still, the idea is meant to inspire you to act in some way, whether that's in this case to inspire you to give aid, or whether that's with some of the other pieces which were meant to inspire you to take advantage of these business offerings. So very different, but interesting approaches to the different ways that he was working for very different organizations, different companies. So to kind of wrap up what we've been looking at today and think about the part that advertisements have played in Wood's career. Moving on, after he's becoming famous, his patrons and Wood were kind of congratulating themselves on the ways that they were able to work together. Um, they had developed, they felt, a formula for nurturing artists in Cedar Rapids, and also at the same time, kind of nurturing the city as well, creating contributions to the city and to its culture, and its environment. So returning to our first businessman that we looked at, Henry Ely, he put it in 1931, thinking back about Wood. He remarked that Grant Wood had had the good sense to stay at home and work within the community, saying, quote, that Wood never bartered his birthright for a one-way ticket to any hotbed of culture, but had the courage, confidence, and common sense to stick to his native Iowa and let the wise men of art follow the trail to his own doorway to do him homage, end quote. And so it's interesting to consider how Wood's emergence as a regionalist artist can be understood and kind of appreciated When we think too about this heightened feeling that he and other Cedar Rapidians were feeling about their city at the time as well, this growth that's taking place, the prosperity that's taking place, that you have all of these businessmen who are wanting to advertise their wares by utilizing wood's artistic strengths. And throughout, we see that there's this pride in where they came from, but also this emphasis on the city as being very progressive and very up to date. And these were things that Wood emphasized as well. In each of these commissions, the artistry and the brilliance of the company, as well as the artist, is emphasized. Craftsmanship and quality, these things that Wood would return to again and again. The people of Cedar Rapids supported Wood because they were looking at it as a way of kind of cultivating culture in the city, and spurring more growth and progress through the cultivation of that culture in the creation of an enlightened city in that way. And so, as Wood was successful, that was interpreted as a sign that the city too was being successful and that they had been successful in the creation of this cultural life within Cedar Rapids. So I'm gonna end there, this exploration of some of this advertising work um, in Grant Wood's career, but I hope this has been interesting for you. And now I'm happy to take some questions if there are any. I'll do my best to answer.
Julia?
Yes.
Hi, it's Renelle. You have a question down in the chat.
Oh, I missed that.
Um, I don't know who posted that, but
Oops. Hang on one sec. There we go. Oh, excellent question. Are any of these works on view at the CRMA or might they be anytime soon? That's a wonderful question. Love that little plug that we can do right now. Yes, so we actually have a show up right now in kind of our main Grant Wood gallery, right? When you walk into the gallery, Adoration of the Home is on display there. So you're able to catch that piece right there. And then coming up very soon, actually opening the reception is October 3rd and then official opening on October 5th. But we have the Inspired by Cedar Rapids exhibition, which will be in our temporary gallery space on the first floor. And that show will include a number of these Grant Wood works that we've looked at today. So I'll have three of the pieces that he created for Turner Mortuary, three of those pen and ink drawings. Those will be included there, as well as one of the pieces for the J.G. Cherry series, the one that's showing the exterior view of the plant. So yes, so an opportunity right now to go and see Adoration of the Home, and then coming up very soon, an opportunity to see a few more of these pieces. So I hope you'll be able to do that. Any other questions for me before we end today?
I have another one. Sorry, I can unmute my video. There we go. Hi, Julia. So
Hi,
good to see
Renelle. You too.
you. Hey, so one quick thought. I think I have seen reproductions of the JG Cherry series. I think there are reproductions actually in the Cherry building too, aren't there?
Yes,
Sometimes.
yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Yep. And then another quick question. Um, Grant Wood did lithographs too, and those weren't really advertisements, but he did those for commission as well. And didn't he sell
Yeah.
those? Refresh my memory because I'm really trying hard to remember, and I'm so sorry. But didn't he sell those as well through like a print organization, or was another way
Yeah.
for him to kind of make money, sort of on a quasi-commercial kind of basis? Is that correct?
Yeah, so and I believe those were through Associated American Artists, or AAA, as sometimes it's referred to. But yeah, another way for him to make money, and multiple other artists as well, kind of well-known artists, were creating works for that organization. It allowed people to be able to acquire works from these artists at a more affordable price. Um, and I'm not sure if we've covered that in a previous Grant Wood in Focus, but if we haven't, that might be a good idea for the future. But yeah, the commissions that he created is something that I think we return to over and over again in looking at these different little microcosms that he created throughout his work. So very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, I will stop here, but thank you all so much for joining me today. Oh, one more thing. Several of these pieces are less impressionistic than his other paintings. I assume this was due to the nature of the commission, but how does this tighter style play into his mature style? Oh, yeah. So it does kind of feel like as we're progressing and moving into what he does later on, that we see some elements of that coming into play in some of these commissions. I would say particularly the Cherry series, probably, because later on he does subsequent trips to Europe. He experiences kind of what's going on there, a more harder edged style, something that is a little more something that kind of like Neue Sachlichkeit, this harder edge style that he's looking at a little bit later. And we see some of that coming into play in the Cherry series too. So it's a combination of this kind of leaning into some of these things as he's working on the commissions, but then also gaining inspiration from subsequent trips to Europe and everything that he's seeing around him that's contributing to that mature style. So yeah, great questions. All right. Well, should you want to see any of the rest of our Grant Wood in Focus presentations, do check them out on YouTube. This one will be posted there eventually as well. And we hope to see you at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. Come out and check out some of these pieces that we've talked about today. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.